Star Riders. Welcome to Off the Record,
Of the record night, this late night conversation.
where we dive deeper into the layers of the stories you think you know. And honestly, today's video exists because of you. A few weeks ago, I posted a short called Why Black Girls Were Never the Love Interest. And while I expected people to have opinions, I didn't expect comments like, OMG, I never thought I would see this kind of video on YouTube. Please continue. And another simply saying, keep going. So that's exactly what we're doing. Because the more I thought about that conversation, the more I realized something. This isn't really a discussion about shipping, it's not really about fictional crushes, or even simply about representation. It's about desirability. More specifically, how media teaches us who gets to be desired. Because when we talk about representation, we usually ask who gets to be on screen. I think there's another question that's just as important, which is who gets to be loved. Not loved by the audience, but loved by the story itself. Because those two things are not always the same. And that's what we're exploring in this three-part Off the Record series. And let's go off the record. Before we go any further, we need to define something because when people hear the word desirable, they usually think we're talking about attractiveness, such as physical beauty, looks, appearance, but that's actually not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about romantic desirability. A romantic desirability is a way a story signals that a character is worthy of romantic longing, affection, and pursuit. Notice I didn't say attractive, because attractive and desirable are not necessarily the same thing. A character can be attractive and still never be positioned as somebody audiences are meant to dream about. Think about your favorite fictional crush growing up. What made them your crush? Was it really just their appearance or was it something else? Maybe it was the way they looked at someone. Maybe it was their vulnerability. Maybe it was their chemistry with another character. Maybe it was the fact that the story spent an entire season building anticipation around their love life. Maybe it was the music, the tension, the emotional payoff. Because stories don't just show us characters, stories teaches us how to feel about those characters. And when a story repeatedly tells us this person is special, this person is worth fighting for, this person is worth risking everything for, the audiences starts internalizing that message. That's romantic desirability. It's not accidental, it's constructed, built, and framed. And once you start noticing it, you can't unsee it. Before we get into any of the heavier parts of this discussion, we need to put the definition of romantic desirability to a test so we can all be on the same page and have an understanding of what I'm talking about. And honestly, the easiest way for me to explain this is through using my own fictional crushes as an example. And trust me, I would not be using Andre and Beck as an example. I've been using them for so long, and I mean long. I'm probably like maybe 2 or 3 months in as using them as an example. So I'm tired of saying their names, and I'm pretty sure you are tired of me saying their names. So we are going to use some fresh, new examples. And the only fresh examples I could think of are princes, of course, because when I was younger, I loved princes. I generally didn't realize it until I started writing this script, but somehow Prince Naveen and Prince Zuko both ended up on my childhood crush list. And when I mean Prince Zuko, I'm not talking about season one Zuko when he had that weird hairstyle. I'm talking about season three Zuko, the one that grew his hairstyle. And you know what's funny is that they couldn't be more different from each other. But let's start with Prince Naveen. Now, when Prince Naveen first appears on Princess and the Frog, the movie immediately frames him as desirable. Prince Naveen is charming, he's confident, flirtatious, and handsome. Like, people noticed Prince Naveen before he even got off the boat. That's how fine he was. I can't even say was, is. But the story constantly reminds us that he's somebody people are drawn to, somebody people want, somebody worth pursuing. Even before he becomes a better person, the movie already understands the role he plays within the romance. Naveen was introduced as part of a fantasy, part of the dream and the love story. And that's important because the movie isn't just showing us Naveen, it's teaching us how to feel about Naveen. Then we have Prince Zuko and
No, you are impatient. You have yet to master your basics. Drill it again!
The sages tell us that the Avatar is the last Airbender. He must be over 100 years old by now. He's had a century to master the four elements. I'll need more than basic firebending to defeat him. You will teach me the advanced set!
honestly, he is the absolute complete opposite of Prince Naveen in every which way because Zuko is awkward, angry, emotionally regressed, constantly stressed. And honestly, that's a bar. That's a fucking bar. But anywho, half of the time, Zuko is yelling at somebody and he was obsessed with finding ink. And if I were to describe Zuko to somebody who had never watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, they probably wonder why he became one of the internet's favorite fictional crushes. But that's exactly why he's such a great example, because Zuko wasn't romanticized through charm like Prince Naveen was. Zuko was romanticized through through emotional investment. We saw his pain, his loneliness, his insecurities, and his desperation for acceptance from his father. The audience spends so much time inside Zuko's emotional world that we become attached to him, not because he's perfect, not or he was always right, because he wasn't, but because we understand him. And that's what makes these two characters such great examples, because one is framed through charm, the other is framed through vulnerability. One makes people fall for him because he's charismatic, the other makes people fall for him because he's human. Yet both characters have position as people worth emotionally investing in. Both characters are treated as desirable by the narrative. And that tells us something important. Romantic desirability isn't just about appearance, it's about storytelling. It's about the way narratives teach audiences who matters emotionally, who deserves attention, affection, and to be pursued. Think about how many stories revolve around a character being pursued, not because they're perfect or they're flawless, but because the narrative treats them like they're worthy of pursuing. That's the fantasy, that's the emotional dream being sold. And that's where things get interesting because some characters get to be the object of longing. Person everybody wants, the person whose love story feels important, the person whose relationships get treated like sacred events, and other characters don't, even if they're equally attractive, equally kind, and equally compelling. The difference is not the character, the difference is the framing, and that brings us to something called emotional framing. Now, this is one of those concepts that sounds complicated, but I promise you've experienced it your entire life watching TV, but you and I just never had a name for it. But it's called emotional framing. Emotional framing is the collection of storytelling tools that guide the audience's feelings towards a character. These storytelling tools could be things such as music, lighting, camera angles, emotional focus, vulnerable moments, dramatic pauses, and lingering glances. Stories are constantly teaching us how to feel, even when nobody says a word. Just for an example, let's say two characters walk into a room. One gets soft music, warm lighting, a slow motion entrance, close up shots. The camera lingers on their smile, their eyes, and their reactions. Meanwhile, the second character walks in with no emphasis whatsoever, no emotional attention, no special focus, nothing.
Thanks, thanks.
Listen, cool.
Yeah, I'll look at the old schedule.
Okay.
So I ask you, which character is the audience more likely to remember? Character one or character two? I'll give you a minute to think about it. I don't think it should take you that long, but I'm gonna give you a minute just in case. Exactly, the first character. Because storytelling is emotional guidance. Audience is being subtly directed They're being told, pay attention to this person. This person matters. This person is important. And eventually, this person is desirable. And honestly, I think emotional framing might be one of the most powerful storytelling tools ever created. It shapes our perceptions before we even realize it's happening. Think about how many characters audiences fall in love with despite their flaws. The brooding character becomes mysterious. The awkward character becomes adorable. The reckless character becomes passionate. The emotionally unavailable characters becomes intriguing. We've all seen it happen. We all fallen for it. And that's not a criticism. That's storytelling doing exactly what it's designed to do. But here's the question I keep coming back to. Why are certain flaws considered attractive on some characters but not others? Why do some characters get complexity while others get judgment? Why do characters get grace while others get criticism? And why do some characters get romanticized while others get scrutinized? Again, I'm two for two on these bars, but back to the topic at hand. Because that's where emotional framing starts revealing itself. The story decides which flaws become enduring. The story decides which mistakes become forgivable. The story decides who gets redemption. And the story often decides who remains desirable despite their imperfections.
Being me. But I want you to know, I am so, so sorry, Uncle. I am so sorry and ashamed of what I did. I don't know how I can ever make it up to you, but
Prince Zuko might be one of the best examples of emotional framing I've ever seen in media. Because if you look at him objectively when Avatar first begins, he's not exactly the easiest person to root for. Because we all know Zuko. He's angry, impulsive, stubborn, emotionally closed off. And for most of the first season, his entire goal is capturing Aang, the hero of the story. Which means if you only look at Zuko's actions on paper, you probably assume audiences wouldn't like him very much. Avatar does something really interesting. The show doesn't just show us what Zuko does, it shows us why he does it. We learn about his scar, we learn about his abandonment, we learn about his desperate need for his father's approval, and we learn that underneath all that anger is a kid who's been hurt.
Will be your teacher. I looked away.
A kid who's been rejected, a kid who's convinced that if he can just accomplish one impossible task, everything will finally be okay. And suddenly, the audience isn't just watching Zuko, we're understanding him. Then the story takes things a step further because spending so much time chasing the avatar, Zuko actually gets a glimpse of the life he's always wanted, a life of peace, a life without running, a life where he can simply exist alongside Uncle Iroh. And for a moment, it feels like he might finally be happy. But even then, the show continues pulling us into his emotional experience. We see his confusion, his frustration, and his internal conflict. Because Zuko discovers something important. The thing he thought would fix him doesn't. The approval he spent years chasing is enough, and that's such a deeply human realization. Then comes one of the most powerful parts of his story. The moment when Zuko finally realized he has to choose who he wants to be, not who his father wants him to be, not who the Fire Nation expects him to be, but who Zuko wants to become. And that choice eventually leads him to Team Avatar, the very people he spent years hunting, the very people he once considered enemies, and the very people he blamed for his problems. And watching that transformation unfold is incredible because the audience doesn't just see the destination, we see every step of the journey. We see him struggle, we see him fail, we see him backslide, and we see him make mistakes. And because the story wants us to witness all of that, his flaws don't feel disqualifying, they feel human. His mistakes become opportunities for growth. His struggles become sympathetic, his redemption feels earned, and that's the power of emotional framing. The story gives Zuko grace, depth, and gives him room to be complicated. Instead of asking us to judge him, the story asks us to understand him. And once again, little Ivy wasn't sitting there analyzing narrative theory. I wasn't thinking about emotional framing nor the storytelling techniques. I just knew I liked it. I just knew I liked it season 3, Prince Zuko. But looking back now, I could see exactly why. The narrator spent 3 seasons teaching me how to feel about him, and by the end of the story, it wasn't his scar that made him memorable, nor his firebending, nor his redemption. It was the fact that the audience got to grow alongside him.
When you live in a castle, everything is done for you. All the time. They dress you, they feed you, drive you, brush your teeth.
Oh, poor baby.
I admit it was a charmed life until the day my parents cut me off, and suddenly I realized I don't know how to do anything.
And honestly, Prince Naveen is one of my favorite examples of emotional framing because he shows how a story can completely shape the way we see a character. When we first meet Naveen, he's charming, confident, flirtatious, and if we're being honest, a little spoiled. Like he's irresponsible and he's used to getting his way. And on paper, those traits could easily make him unlikable. But The Princess and the Frog doesn't frame Naveen as someone we're supposed to dislike. The movie surrounds him with romance, charm, humor, music, and chemistry. The audience is encouraged to see his flaws as part of his appeal rather than reasons to reject him. And as the story progresses, we get to watch him grow. We see him become more selfless, more thoughtful, more mature,
I promise I will do whatever it takes to make it come true.
more willing to put somebody else's happiness before his own. The movie doesn't just show us Naveen's transformation, it emotionally guides us through it. It invites us to root for him, to understand him, to forgive him, and eventually to see him as worthy of love. And that's the power of emotional framing. The story isn't just telling us who Naveen is, it's teaching us how to feel about who he is. I think this is why childhood crushes matter more than people realize. Not because crushes themselves are some huge social issue, but because childhood crushes reveal who media taught us to romanticize. Most children aren't sitting around analyzing cinematography. They're not studying narrative theory. They're not dissecting emotional framing. They're just watching stories, feeling emotions, connecting with characters, and absorbing messages. Messages about beauty, romance, and who gets chosen. Because media doesn't just teach us who the heroes are, media teaches us who gets loved. And if you constantly watch the same kind of characters receive devotion, affection, and romantic attention, your brain starts associating those qualities with desirability, even without realizing it. And that's the conversation I want to continue in the next part of the discussion. Because now that we've established romantic desirability and now that we've explored emotional framing, there's another concept we need to talk about. A concept that's quietly determines whose feelings matters most in a story, whose relationships matter most, and whose happiness matters most. And that concept is narrative centrality. Because once we understand narrative centrality, we can finally start answering the question that's been sitting underneath this entire conversation. Why are Black characters often loved by audiences but not always desired by the narrative? And trust me, that's where this conversation gets really interesting. But again, we took things a step forward in part 2. But until then, let me know who's your biggest fictional crushes were growing up and whether you think the story influenced that crush. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell to join the journey through the stars for more out of this world ideas. Until next time, keep your pen to the stars and your heart in the pages. Sincerely yours.